Hello and welcome back guys. Today we are starting a new story titled Sword Art Online, Integral Factor, written by Anthony Tyler 9. Please check the link in the description, and let's start. Sword Art Online, Isolation. Izuku looked through a window of a shop as he saw a game that he'd wanted to try the beta out for a long while. Sword Art Online, he knew that he couldn't spend time with friends, at least not when he was quirkless. Nobody liked the quirkless as a whole, so he managed to play video games as an outlet for everything his life had done to him. Video games through RPGs were the best kinds of games for him since he could make the decisions of what to do to further the story. Buying the game with his allowance, he managed to snag the game from the place at a very cheap price, and since he'd have the game early, he could have the full game when it fully comes out. All he'd really need to do is just download a large file holding the full game with its graphics. He had the nerve gear as well as other things to prepare for playing the game itself, but he was happy to even have enough money for it. His mother worked very hard and gave him an allowance in order to keep himself safe inside their home. She couldn't come home from work because of how much a nurse was needed at the Muzutafu General Hospital. Arriving at his home about an hour later, he pushed his belongings into his bedroom before plugging in the game to his computer and laid down on his bed. Before he decided to begin playing the beta test, Izuku left the bedroom and made dinner for his mother. He knew that she wouldn't allow him to play his games unless his chores were all done and completed. So as he left the bedroom to complete his chores and make dinner for her, he cleaned the house and made sure everything was done before returning back to his room. It was nearing the evening as Izuku laid himself on his bed as he placed his completed dinner on the desk next to his bed. He smiled to himself as he placed the nerve gear on top of his head as he laid down on his bed before plugging the nerve gear into his computer. Link start. Izuku said, as a white light encroached on his vision and multiple colors invaded his sight. He finally arrived at the character creation screen as he began to make his customized character. He smiled as he found the perfect parameters in order to make his custom character perfect for himself to use. Once he was finished making his character to play the beta, he was moved into some more lights before arriving at the world of SAO. He looked at his surroundings as he smiled at the completed fifth floor of SAO's Aincrad structure. He saw multiple NPCs moving about their days as they spoke to one another in silence, speaking from where he stood. Moving through the first floor's main city of Town of Beginnings, Izuku made his way towards the blacksmith NPC so he could get some weapons and armor. He knew that wearing armor and holding weapons increased his basic stats, that he was formed with the game's basic stats for everything he worked on. Grabbing a sword and shield, he walked away from the area as he entered the first floor plains. He looked at each and every beast monster that was on the first floor as he worked on training himself to use the weaponry. Taking a deep breath, Izuku activated his sword skill as it glowed a appealing green color before he swung it downward on one of the boar creatures. He watched as a damage stat point showed up around the boar as half its hit points were taken from it with 15 damage dealt. Izuku smirked to himself as he continued further to damage the creature until he defeated it. Once he got the congratulations for defeating the boar, he got some call as well as some item drops to increase his weapons and armor. Thinking he can take on multiple quests to gain levels fast, he took off towards the first floor boss room. Izuku only had a few days before the game would undergo an update for the full game to be added onto the beta. Rushing through the levels to get a good amount of skill points, Izuku placed each and every one of them separated in different skills. Dexterity for defense, agility for speed, intelligence for smarts, as well as strength points to increase his ability to use heavy and hard-hitting weapons. What Izuku really wanted, however, was to get enough points to create himself a bow and infinite arrows. And as he continued on with the small quests, he finally managed to unlock his favorite weapon. He had taken classes on how to use a bow and arrow throughout middle school as he found that he had a very good passion for the sport. With that weapon given to him and subsequently upgraded a bit so that he could do high damage to his enemies, Izuku headed for the dungeon underneath Tulbana. Moving throughout the entire dungeon, Izuku found multiple boars and wolves that he could kill and move on to the next area. He smiled to himself as he let his true self be shown as he destroyed his opponents before he heard something in the distance. Help! A feminine voice called out as he immediately took off. Don't worry, I'm on my way. Izuku said, not thinking that the girl would hear him. Running through multiple enemies, and killing them whilst he ran, he finally found the girl who he was hearing. She was just shorter than he was based on his character model, but she had green eyes similar to his own. Her hair was short but black in color as she held her knife in her hand, looking very scared of being defeated by these monsters. Rushing in without thinking, Izuku leaped into the fray, throwing his blade out and sending a few of them away from her. Spinning to swing his blade into another monster, he activated his sword skill, causing his blade to pass through its pixels and kill it. "Get back!" Izuku called out to the girl, who immediately nodded and moved back. Horizontal slashing cross. Izuku called out as his blade spun in a square shape. "Wow!" the girl muttered as the slash finished the enemies off. "Sai, are you alright? I could have sworn that you were in trouble," Izuku said, as the girl nodded. "Thanks for saving me. I don't know what would have happened if you didn't save me," the girl said, as Izuku nodded to her. "That's fine. You would have just respawned at the town of beginnings. After that you would have just lost all your experience that you've gained before being killed," Izuku said, as the girl visibly sighed in relief. "Well, gee, good thing that I didn't die like that," she said, as Izuku gave the girl a once-over. "What's your name, if you don't mind me asking?" Izuku asked, as the girl happily smiled. "My name is Koharu." "Nice to meet you," Koharu replied before trying to get his name. "The name is Deku. Let's get you out of here," Izuku said, as Koharu nodded. Following the path down the road, they eventually found their way out of the dungeon. But as soon as they were about to leave, a large group of wolves appeared in front of them both as they growled angrily at the two. Pulling out his sword, Izuku prepared for a long fight as he pulled Koharu behind himself as she looked visibly scared. But before he could even fight them, multiple sword skills tore through the group before a singular man was shown to the two of them. "Are you both alright? I thought you two were outnumbered by a lot of mobs," a voice said, that was both scratchy and a little pessimistic. "I was trying to get Koharu-chan out of the dungeon. We just came across the wolves on our way out," Izuku replied. "I see, well, make sure that you are trained to fight on your own. I'd hate to see some good players get beaten by floor 1 mobs," the man said, as Izuku nodded at them. "So what is the name of our savior?" Izuku asked, as the man chuckled. "The name's Kirito." "Nice to meet you, Deku and Koharu," Kirito said, before they reappeared in the town of beginnings. Once there, the trio had split up as Izuku and Koharu walked through the town of beginnings to help her get prepared fully. Once they were done with their preparations, Izuku looked down to her as she smiled up at him now that she had her supplies. "Thank you again for saving me. Twice now that you stood in the way of the enemies. Do you think you can train me on how to defend myself against the monsters of Aincrad?" Koharu asked. "I'm sure that I can help you learn how when the main game comes out," Izuku said, rubbing the girl's head. "Well, I guess we should return back to the real world now. They should be ending the beta early today," Koharu said, as she signed out. "Yeah, see you when the game fully begins," Izuku said, as Koharu nodded with a smile and disappeared in motes of pixels. Izuku smiled at the entirety of Aincrad's first city before turning off his nerve gear from the inside, and his consciousness returned back to his body. And once he looked at how dark it was outside, he saw the time on his alarm clock and noticed that it was only at 2 a.m. Shaking his head, he just decided to sleep and wait for the beta test to be complete and prepare for the full game release. As it turned out, the full game release was about a week later, as Izuku was coming home with injuries all over his form. As he entered his home, he walked over to the bathroom hoping that his mother wasn't home right now. Bakugo had gone harder on him as of late as he took off his shirt and pants to prepare for a shower. But looking at what he looked like now underneath all the clothing, he cringed slightly at all the burn marks marring his entire form. Getting into the shower, he continued to wash himself clean as well as use the hot water to clean out the open wounds he had. "Hiss, I can't believe Kaken had used a knife this time. He never uses a knife against me, I guess that is what I get for doing better than him in cooking class. Izuku hissed out. As the hot water increased the temperature of his burns on his front and back parts of his body, he cringed even more as they burned in pain. But pain was something that Izuku was used to as a quirkless individual, but he couldn't help but think of this as training for people who can use flaming quirks against him. If he can't handle a singular burn or other forms of weapons, how will he become a better hero? Finishing up his shower, he looked at himself in the mirror as the steam cleared up for him to see. Multiple burns that were on his torso and legs were shown angrily glaring at him in a red color as he placed the burn cream on his body to heal them up. He then pulled out some gauze and bandaged himself up with them as he flinched softly at each cool bandage hitting his burns. With that finished, he left the bathroom in new clothing as he entered his bedroom. His only safe haven within his home that Kaken isn't allowed in whenever the boy is around, especially since if that were allowed Izuku wouldn't feel safe at home. Connecting his head to the nerve gear, Izuku prepared to enter the video game world of SAO as he thought about making his time there useful. Link start. Izuku called out, as he entered the world of Sword Art Online. He was also unaware of how the news were talking about how everyone shouldn't be allowing their children to use the nerve gear. Especially with how 10,000 people were now trapped in the game Sword Art Online, with no way of escaping at this point in time. Inko Midoriya came home to see this news outlet stating this as she rushed over to her son in his room and heard him call out for Link start and moved the door open. Izuku, don't. She called out but finds that she was too late. Sword Art Online. Logging into SAO, Izuku managed to enter the character customization screen as he began to make changes to his original character. He looked at the straight hair that he just didn't like before turning it into his curly mess of hair. Instead of having it be the green and black color he normally has, he changed it to the white color since he's suffered enough stress of his life IRL. Once he fixes some parts of his character to be dangerously close to how he looks normally, he begins the game as he entered the town of beginnings. Looking around the area for if he could find Koharu, he eventually finds her as she is looking for him. Walking in her direction, he gains her attention as she rushed over to him, and before he can even speak to her, she interrupted him. Do you know where Deku-kun is? He said that he'd meet up with me today to train me. Koharu said, as Izuku smiled at her. The name is Enkidu. And I am the person you're looking for, Koharu-chan. Izuku said, rubbing the girl's head. Deku-kun? She asked as Izuku nodded. Just call me N please. Izuku said, as the girl nodded. So where are we going first? She asked as Izuku had her follow him. First off, we are going to head to the local blacksmith NPC so we can get some weapons and armor. Once we get that stuff, it will increase our health and damage output. Then we can begin your training. Izuku said, with a smile. Okay. She said, smiling at him. They walked through the streets of Town of Beginnings before finding the blacksmith and gained their supplies. Koharu did notice that Izuku created a bow at the start instead of using a sword and shield, and he'd given her a knife. As they walked out of the whole building, they placed their new armor on as Koharu watched as her health went from only 1000 HP to she happily looked at him before noticing that his health was far lower than hers as she tilted her head at him. Aren't you supposed to have a whole lot of health at the start? Koharu asked as Izuku nodded. I made my character have lower health in exchange for higher DPS. Since I will be mainly using a bow, I wanted to make sure that I can kill any enemies we come across very swiftly. Izuku said, as the girl tilted her head again. But what happens if an enemy gets in close quarters with you? She asked as Izuku smirked. I will be taking an important quest to give me a specific weapon to help with that, not to mention I could use it with my bow. Izuku said, as they arrived at the first plains zone. Alright, for the first opponent you have this boar, just pull your dagger back in whatever stance you feel is perfect for you. Then when it starts to glow, then launch at the boar and think nothing more than hitting it. Izuku said, as the girl nodded. The two decided to go on a few more quests as they waited for the game creator to give a speech in the Town of Beginnings for new players of SAO. Izuku had leveled up to level 4 whilst Koharu had managed to get to level 3 since she was in a party with the boy. They were looking over their personal skills that Izuku kept track of, and since he was going for a SDPS build he made her more of a TDEF build. SDPS is speed damage per second build, TDEF is tank defense build. Once they were completed with their quests, they turned them in as they returned to the plains zone where they found two people standing looking over the entirety of the plains zone. Walking up to the two they found that they were talking to one another about what they'll be doing once they finish their day of playing. One of them had a pizza coming and needed to be there at the door to get it and have it to eat before coming back online to play again. The second one the two immediately recognized as they rushed over to the taller boy whilst he took notice of the two. "Hey, you two, what brings you here? And who's the white-haired boy?" Kirito asked, as Koharu pouted at him. "This is Enkidu, he was Deku in the beta test," Koharu said, as the other guy stood up. "Wait. You three were in the beta test?" he called out. "Why yeah. I only was on floor," Koharu said, as Izuku spoke up. "I had originally made it to floor 8 before I couldn't get any further," Izuku said, as Kirito whistled. "Wow, you got pretty far, not as far as I did, but that's pretty far for the beta." "How high level were you?" Kirito asked. "I was around level 45 at the time, I mostly focused on leveling up before taking on floor bosses," Izuku said, as Kirito nodded. "Floor bosses can be tricky BSTRDS if you don't get high enough level to make their damage null and void," Kirito said, chuckling. "Hey Kirito, not that I want to sound like an idiot but where is the log out button?" their newbie asked. "It should be right here," Kirito said, questioningly as he stared at his log out button. "What's wrong?" Izuku asked, as the two looked over at him. "Hey, our logout button is gone, check both of yours," the red-haired boy said. Checking over their logout buttons Izuku found that his was missing, and the same was for Koharu as she looked more scared. And before Izuku could console her enough to be out of her growing panic attack all three of them noticed something in their bag. Opening it up they found that it was only a mirror, and looking at it confusedly all three were suddenly forced to teleport back to Town of Beginning's main plaza. Looking around them they found more and more people appearing in the plaza. Koharu stayed near Izuku as she found him more protective than most. "Hey Kirito," the red-haired man said, looking quite disturbed. "What Klein?" Kirito asked, looking at him. "Should the sky be red?" he asked, as everyone looked up. And sure enough there was a hexagon in the air showing the word error. And soon more and more showed up and eventually there was enough for the entire sky to bleed out a crimson-colored individual who hid their face from them all. His clothing attire showed that he was very intelligent, not to mention how he had red all over his body with a name on top. "Invincible object, attention players. My name is Kayaba Akihiko. And as of this moment, I am in control of this world," the creator of SAO said, as his voice was oddly echoey. "Okay, what is he going to tell us?" Klein asked, as Izuku replied for Kirito. "Maybe he will tell us what in the world is going on, probably informing us about why he's doing this," Izuku said, as they all looked to the creator of the game's avatar. "I'm sure most of you have already noticed that an item missing from your main menus. The logout button." "The giant being," Kayaba said, pulling out his own logout button. "Let me assure you, this is not a defect in the game. I repeat. This is not a defect. This is how Sword Art Online was designed to be. You cannot log yourselves out of SAO. And no one from the outside will be able to shut down or remove the nerve gear from your head. If anyone attempts to do so, a transmitter inside of the nerve gear will discharge a microwave signal into your skull, destroying your brain, and ending your life," Kayaba said, as multiple people below began showing their distrust. "You can't be telling us the truth. There's no way. Impossible. That's bullshit." Players all replied in growing fear and trepidation. "He's gotta be nuts, right, Kirito?" Klein asked, worriedly. He's not, the transmitter signals in the nerve gear are just like microwaves. If the safety's disabled, then they can fry your brain. Kirito responded. Couldn't someone cut the power dash? Klein questioned, before Izuku interrupted. That won't work. The nerve gear's got an internal battery. Izuku said, remembering a small battery sign on his headset before beginning the game. Gwa. This is crazy. It's totally crazy. Klein said, throwing his arms about in frustration. Despite my warning, the families and friends of some of the players have attempted to remove the nerve gear. An unfortunate decision to say the least. As a result, the game now has 213 less players from when it began. Kayaba said, as everyone looked downright fearful. And deleted from both Aincrad and the real world. Kayaba finished, as Kirito looked downright concerned. No way. Kirito muttered. At this point, it's safe to assume the likelihood of a nerve gear being removed is minimal at best. I hope this brings you a little bit of comfort as you try and clear the game. There is no longer any way to revive someone within the game. If your HP drops to 0, your avatar will be deleted from the system forever. And the nerve gear will simultaneously destroy your brain. Kayaba said, as Izuku, Kirito and Koharu gained a vision of what could happen in their heads. All three of them imagined themselves failing to defeat a mere boar with low health, and when their bodies suddenly become encapsulated with motes of pixels, they die at the same time. Izuku gripped his fist as he growled silently to himself, Koharu being the only one to hear him being unnaturally and uncharacteristically angered. There is only one way to escape now. You must clear the game. Kayaba said, as everyone entered in uproar whilst Kayaba ignored their outcries. Right now, you're all gathered on floor 1, the lowest level of Aincrad. If you can get through the dungeon and defeat the boss, you may advance onto the next floor. Defeat the boss on floor 100, and you will clear the game. Kayaba informed as Klein looked downright hopeless. Even the beta testers didn't make it that high. Klein cried out, as he felt hope slowly ebb away. Last but not least, I've placed a little present in the item storage of every player. Please, have a look. Kayaba said, as everyone looked in their item storage. A mirror. Kirito asked, as Izuku did the same thing. And as soon as everyone pulled out the mirror, everyone suddenly gained a glowing form as their view was obstructed from each other. The entire plaza of the Town of Beginnings was eventually covered in the white light as everyone soon realized something was off about each other. You alright, Kirito? Klein questioned, looking at the much shorter boy. Yeah, wait, who are you? Kirito asked, as Izuku soon came into frame with Koharu. I'm me, who are you? Klein replied as they were now in their real bodies. Enkidu. Are you alright? Koharu asked, as both boys looked over. They looked at the boy in question as he was covered to the brim in burn scarring on his upper neck and face. There was even a slashing scar on his cheek that ruined his freckles on his cheeks, but from their point of view, there was something ominous about his dull emerald eyes. Wait, emerald eyes. Wait a second. Is that you? Klein. Wait a second. Is that you? Kirito. Both boys called out, looking at one another. Enkidu. Are you alright? Koharu asked, as Izuku looked himself over. I am fine. I never thought that this was how I'd be seen by everyone. But whatever. Izuku muttered to himself after answering Koharu. But how? Klein asked, as Kirito explained. The scan. There's a high-density signal device inside the nerve gear. It can see what my face looks like. But how does it know my height and body type? He questioned, not really to anyone. Oh, so through this calibration thing, it asked you to touch your body all over like this, remember? Klein retorted. Oh yeah, I remember now. You're right. That's where it got our physical data. Kirito said, as Kayaba spoke again. Right now, you're probably wondering, why? Why would Kayaba Akihiko, developer of Sword Art Online and Nerve Gear, do this? Ultimately, my goal was a simple one. The reason I created Sword Art Online was to control the fate of a world of my design. Kayaba said, as everyone glared at Kayaba's avatar. Kayaba. Kirito thought to himself angrily. As you can see, I have achieved my goal. This marks the end of the tutorial, and the official launch of Sword Art Online. Players, I wish you the best of luck. Kayaba said, before thinking of one last thing to tell everyone. Before I go, there is one last piece of advice I will give all players of Sword Art Online. Anyone wielding the power of a quirk will not be capable of using it in my world. You will try and beat this game through your own hard work and dedication to defeat all 100 floor bosses within Aincrad. Kayaba said, before disappearing. Almost immediately everyone was looking at the now clear sky with fear, but Izuku and Koharu were already moving away from the main plaza. Izuku knew how bad it would get for everyone in the town of beginnings in a situation like this, personal experience from out on the streets running from bullies. As soon as he got himself and Koharu a good ways away, they were hidden in a small alley as they regained their breath. This isn't a G game anymore. I don't want to die. Koharu said, as tears fell from her eyes. Koharu-chan, don't worry. Everything will be fine. Izuku said, as he remembered All Might's final words to him on that rooftop earlier that day. Can one become a hero without a quirk? No. I should think not. It's alright to dream, kid. Just, make sure that it's realistic. You could try and become a police officer, doctor, or firefighter. As a policeman you get a lot of hate from taking the bad guys to prison, but at least it's a realistic job for you. I'm sorry. All Might's voice rang in Izuku's mind. Koharu looked up at Izuku, tears streaming down her face as Izuku stared into her own with his now glowing emerald orbs. Because we will escape. Izuku said, as she looked a little better before hugging him. Sword Art Online, Isolation. Izuku led Koharu out of the town of beginnings as they rushed to get some early quests done so they both can move on to Tolbana, the first village on their journey. As they moved through the fields of the first floor of the Aincrad construct, they fought multiple monsters as well as gained experience throughout their journey. They even came across a girl who was trying to learn about each and every monster so that they could help out the other people stuck in the game. And Izuku, being the kind person he was, decided to do the mission himself as Koharu wrote down their attack patterns. Izuku for these fights used a mace weapon so that he could have Koharu write down each attack pattern of the monsters. For the next few days of searching through the plains, and leveling up along the way, Koharu and Izuku found some more missions for them to complete whilst searching for the boss room. But as they moved throughout the entirety of the first floor, they just simply couldn't find the labyrinth that led to the boss monster's room. They eventually make it towards Town of Beginnings again as they came across a young man with weirdly spiked hair asking for people to join a small guild. Izuku and Koharu had decided to stick as far away from the guild since they'd rather stay outside of a guild. Izuku had stated to Koharu early on in their adventure on the first floor that if they joined a guild, most of their experience would be shared with their guildmates. Not something either of them wanted this early on into the death game of SAO, and they were gaining levels pretty quickly. But that swift leveling would eventually dry up since people were now getting those quests for themselves and not allowing anyone to use them. Monopolizing the entire quest industry at the start of the first floor was not a good thing, and Izuku was forced to bring himself and Koharu on harder mission quests as well as ones that didn't give that much experience. They'd come across another person on their travels as they asked them for information on certain questlines in the game. Their name was Argo, an info broker who gave information for some call and some information on beast attack patterns in return. Izuku and Koharu were happy to do missions from Argo since she had been much more receptive to the two giving her call and getting information about certain quests. They were leaving the Town of Beginnings when someone walked over to them both as they were preparing to leave. Hey! I need you two to get something for me really quick. The spiky-haired boy said, as he walked up to them. Kibeo, if this is about me and Koharu joining your guild then the answer is no. Izuku said, sighing in exasperation. Hey! I don't ask you both to join my totally awesome guild all the time. He said, slightly miffed. Really? I distinctly remember you begging me and Koharu to join your guild literally last night over our time at the inn. Izuku said, as Kabeo just looked a little sheepish. Well, you two are really prepared for this whole game, as if you know what to do. I would like to have people like you in a guild such as mine. Kabeo said, as Izuku shook his head. What did you want me and Koharu to get? Aside from joining your guild? Izuku questioned. Okay, so there are some healing potions that me and some of the guys need since we're going to raid a small dungeon nearby. We want to be fully prepared for it, we're well leveled, but want it to be extra sure. Kabeo said, as Izuku thought about it. I don't know, it sounds like you're going to owe us a favor after this. Izuku said, looking to Koharu. I don't mind, so long as nobody dies on this dungeon raid. Koharu said, as Izuku nodded. Where is this questline to get healing potions take place? Izuku asked, looking in Kabeo's happy eyes. It's over by the first town discovered by Kirito. Talbana, you'll find an NPC asking for those to enter a small forest through one of the teleport monuments. Use that and you will enter the forest. I need at least 5 healing herbs. I will do the rest from there. Kabeo said, as Izuku nodded. As Izuku and Koharu entered Talbana, they found the NPC handing out the quest for entering the forest for 5 herbs. Smiling at the NPC, they entered conversation with her as she told them to defeat the monsters in the Smiling Forest in order to get 5 smiling herbs. Moving to the monument, they activated it and moved to where their quest was going to begin. Looking at a loading screen for the two of them, they thought about what they should do for a plan. Izuku was clearly going to hang back, but based on their stats right now he was more perfect for the frontline defensive role. In the time it took them to level up to around 15, Izuku was around level 19 and with around 3,500 health points to use. Koharu's was only around 2,500 and she was getting concerned with her ability to be Izuku's shield for when he is taken advantage of by monsters who become smarter. Izuku had informed her time and again that she will be perfect as his teammate, as he would rather have someone watching his back instead of having to watch hers. Ever since they left the town of beginnings about a month ago, they had not left one another's side, especially in terms of bedrooms. Very wary about who might take advantage of the two of them being unconscious to start a fight between the two of them. Arriving in the forest, they stood across from a large horde of monsters that Izuku had been able to take care of on his own in the past. But with how the two of them were overleveled for this quest, some of the monsters were leveled to be near their own level. So this fight was bound to give them even more herbs for the quest Kabeo had given them, enough to hold on to some of their own. And entering the fray, the two took down monsters at the same time as they never stood a chance. They'd even come across a monster that was similar to a polar bear, but with way less health than a polar bear actually had. Within seconds they teamed up on the monster and killed it swiftly. And with that done, they looked at all the herbs that the monster was guarding and collected enough for Kabeo as well as for themselves. They saw a small portal on the ground nearby and stepped into it as they were brought back to the NPC as she smiled at them. Have you finished the Smiling Herbs quest? She asked, as Izuku spoke. Yes, we've gathered the required 5 herbs. Izuku said, placing the herbs in her hands as she vibrated slightly. Alright, the experience you both gain is 58 experience each. You also get 25 healing crystals, and a couple of black stone ores to upgrade your weapons. Come again some other time. The NPC said, as Izuku and Koharu left her. The two walked over to a nearby inn as they decided to rest for that specific day in order to give Kabeo the quest items. Going to bed early that evening, the two were preparing to get up in the morning as they wanted to get some leveling done before they find the boss room. And as they went to bed that evening, the time passed faster than they thought it would, as before they knew it they were waking up. Leaving the inn early in the morning, the two made their way over to where Kabeo was clear to be waiting for their return. Using the teleport monument, they arrived in the town of beginnings as they saw him waiting near the front gate. Kibeo noticed their arrival and walked over to the two of them as they both stopped in front of him. "So did you get the herbs?" he asked, as Izuku nodded. "I even got them transformed into healing crystals." "You got yourself at least 13 healing crystals. I gave you some of my own crystals by the way," Izuku said, as Kibeo nodded. "Thank you for your donation, Enkidu. We will use them sparingly after all we heard about Diavel's party finding the boss room yesterday evening," Kibeo said, as Izuku and Koharu stared at him in shock. "They found the boss room?" the two asked, incredulous. "Yeah, they came across it by accident. But they were able to leave the room quick enough to not die. It's at the bottom of the Talbana labyrinth. They're going to be holding a meeting in Talbana to prepare for the attack. This will mark the very first strike back against Kayaba," Kibeo said, leaving. After hearing this information, the two walked over to the teleport monument and teleported over to Talbana. Arriving a few minutes later, the two had moved towards the amphitheater so that they could see what the meeting was going to be about. Moving through the stands, they both found that there weren't many people at this meeting. If anything, there was just barely enough people for a full raid on the first floor boss room. Looking at the stage, the two found the person who had claimed to have found the first floor boss room. He was wearing gray and blue armor as well as a sword on his back with a shield with it. He had short blue hair with gray-blue eyes as he stared at everyone. If he were to be seen up close, he'd be taller than Izuku by a fair margin if Izuku had to guess himself. But the man then spoke to them all with a voice demanding attention as well as he gave them a determined glare. "Hello everyone, my name is Diavel. And in this game, before it was turned into a death game, my role was a knight," he said, as everyone stared at him. "Dude, this isn't the 1200s. You really need to get your head out of your butt," one of the people here said. "Haha. I know, but I wanted to release the tension between all of us. Especially with the information that I had come across with my own party in search of the first floor boss room," Diavel said, quieting everyone. "Now that everyone has become quiet, I can begin the meeting to take down the first floor boss Ilfong the Kobold Lord," Diavel said, with a very determined expression. "Sword Art Online, Isolation, based on information that we gathered on the boss, his main weapon should be a large bone axe for attacking and a leather shield to defend himself. He is over 2 meters tall with blue-gray fur on his body but with copper-red eyes. He hides a weapon on his back, and we don't know what kind of weapon it will be, but based on our beta tester information he should have a talwar and use regular sword skills," Diavel said, as the entire group nodded along. "So he shouldn't have anything new about himself this time around," Izuku muttered, gaining Koharu's attention. "You fought Ilfong before?" she asked, as Izuku nodded. "I completed around at least 8 floors before the closed beta test had come to an end. So I've had time to fight Ilfong on my own multiple times for solo leveling," Izuku replied as Koharu nodded. "So what, is there something off about this boss monster?" Koharu asked. "Ilfong the Kobold Lord favors his bone axe for a majority of the fight. When he gets to a very low level of health, he will switch to his talwar blade, which would resemble a cutlass from the Assassin's Creed games. But that is where everything goes wrong. He used katana skills in the beta, so the fact that Diavel hasn't stated that he should be using them is very concerning," Izuku said, as the two continued to listen to him. For the remainder of the meeting, Diavel spoke about how they should all work together in different groups. One large group would be the tanks who take the damage that the boss gives them since they'd have the most health. Then the attacking groups were supposed to be split up into different teams of Teams AF. Izuku and Koharu were both placed in a duo team that was Team D, where they keep an eye on the battle and replace Teams AC should they be overwhelmed. With Izuku and Koharu nodding along with Diavel's plans, that was at least until Kibeo entered the conversation as he jumped down from the top of the seats. "Hey! Hold up a sec!" A very familiar and clearly annoying voice called out from the stands. "I can't believe this guy." Izuku exasperatedly sighed. "My name's Kibeo, you got that? Before we take on the boss, I want to get something off my chest." Kibeo said, as Izuku placed a hand over his face. This better not be what I think this is about. Izuku muttered as Koharu looked to him. What are you talking about? She asked. Just listen to him, and you'll hear it from the man himself. Izuku said, as he looked so done with Kibeo for the moment. We all know about the 2,000 players who died so far, yeah. Well, some of you need to apologize to M right now. Kibeo said, pointing to the small crowd. Is he serious? Koharu questioned. Nope, he's definitely serious. Izuku muttered as he listened to Kibeo. You mean the ones who were ex-beta testers, right? Diavel questioned seriously. Of course I mean them. The day that this stupid but game started, the beta guys just up and vanished, right? They ditched all us new beginners. Kibeo said, as he continued. They snagged all the good hunting spots, and they grabbed all the easy quests too. They were the only ones getting stronger in here, and this whole time they ignored us like we're nothing. Kibeo said, waving his hand in a dismissive wave. HRRN. Hell, I bet there are some of M here. Come on out, beta testers. We should make M apologize to us, and we should make M give us all their money and the items they got. Kibeo said, pointing at both ends of the group. Izuku openly glared at Kibeo as he stood up, allowing everyone to look at him. Even Koharu stared at him in shock. Kibeo though just looked even more smug as Izuku walked down the steps as he grew closer and closer to Kibeo. By the time Izuku was right in front of Kibeo, the young man had actually opened his eyes and looked into Izuku's eyes and looked a little shocked. You say that I should apologize to the 2,000 players that died only a month into this game. Well, how about this? I gave you all the information you needed to fight the monsters on each area within floor. None of you would be alive if it weren't for the beta testers giving out all the information broker books on the monsters within this floor level. Izuku said, lifting a small notebook from his pocket. So what about that? Kibeo asked, as Izuku fixed him a glare. Well, if you read the F thing, you should have seen that every single monster was written in it. XPLCT details about each and every monster that I've come across on my journey to search for the first floor boss. I handed my book to Argo, the info broker by the way, and told her to copy my notes and hand it out to everyone on the server. But still 2,000 people died. Izuku said, as Kibeo was now losing his edge. So what? It's not like you helped us physically. He retorted. Izuku had enough of Kibeo's incessant pointing blame and just punched him in the face, causing the boy to fall back with a yelp. Kibeo got up ready to attack Izuku when he saw his downright furious expression as he walked up to the downed boy. Would you just shut up? I and the other beta testers put our lives on the line just to get this information. 2,000 people died and all you care about is US beta testers giving an apology and handing the items and weapons we got fair and square over to you. That's not how the world works. Izuku growled. If I might interject. A very masculine voice called out. My name is Agile, and I would like to state the fact that Enkidu is correct in his wording. The beta testers did have Argo hand out these little notebooks out for all players to use against the monsters. This book had their attack patterns as well as their full health and skills that they could use. But the simple matter is that some of you still died with this information. The fault does not lie in the beta testers but in the idiots who thought that they could continue to take on the threats with lowered supplies before leaving. I came here to learn about the boss, not sit here and point fingers at anyone. Agile said, as Izuku nodded. With that said and finished, Kibeo walked back to his seat with a pout as Agile walked back to his seat with a neutral expression. Izuku however walked over to Koharu and patted her head before leaving the area. He needed to cool off after screaming at that idiot of a player. Walking around the town of Talbana, Izuku just let out a massive sigh as he sat down at a specific bench in the town. Rubbing his temples, he thought about how he could have had Kibeo remember what he and Koharu did just the other day for him. Gathering supplies for him and his group to take on a dungeon without any backup required since they were well leveled. He wasn't alone for long as he heard movement next to him as he leveled the newcomer a neutral expression. It was Kirito as the young man looked at him with a concerned expression on his face before he spoke. "Hey, are you alright? I've never heard you scream like that towards someone before," Kirito said, as Izuku shook his head. "I'm just trying to calm down from that. I've never felt such utter anger before, and I just let it out against Kabeyo. I know his type of people," Izuku said, as Kirito scoffed. "I've never liked people like Kabeyo by the way," Kirito said, as Izuku chuckled. "I used to have a friend who was very similar to Kabeyo, except he was way worse with both his personality and actions," Izuku said, as Kirito thought about it. "Was this person the one who gave you those scars on your body when the game started?" Kirito asked. "Him and a couple of others. But that is a story for another time," Izuku said, cracking his neck. "Well, Diavel asked Koharu to get some weapons and healing items from the vendors over there. You might as well talk to her about your anger problems," Kirito said, before leaving. Standing up from his seat, Izuku walked over to where Koharu was looking over the weapons and armor from the vendor. She had a look of complete distrust as well as concern written on her face when she noticed Izuku walking towards her. Tears of happiness rushed from her eyes as she rushed to him as she pulled him into a hug, apologizing for him having to call Kabeyo out like that. He told her that it wasn't her fault that he went out there to speak to Kabeyo like that, he just let the anger he held within his heart get out in that moment. He allowed himself to let his rage out for that moment and went a bit far when he punched Kabeyo in the face. "Okay, so how many items and weapons did Diavel ask you to collect?" Izuku asked, as Koharu thought about it. "He said that he wanted everyone to be fully prepared, so he asked me to collect some herbs from the local vendor. But I don't have enough, Colonel," she said, with a pout. "Here you go, that should get you enough supplies to give to Diavel and then some," Izuku said, as Koharu looked at him. "Have you been saving call this entire time?" she asked, as Izuku nodded. "Can't be broke in this game, otherwise we'd starve out there and getting multiple quests just to live here," Izuku said, as the girl rushed off, a blush on her face. A few hours later, everyone was waiting outside the labyrinth as they stood near their groups looking over their gear. Izuku looked over at Koharu, who held her knife in her hand as she trembled slightly at having to face off against a floor boss for the first time. He placed a hand on her shoulder, letting her calm down with his presence right there for her as she took a calming breath of air as she slowly stopped trembling. "Thanks, Enkidu," she said, as Izuku patted her head. "Of course, we are both party members. I couldn't live if you were incapable of fighting whilst scared," Izuku said, as Koharu asked him a question. "How are you so determined? How are you not as scared?" she asked, worriedly. "I've faced death before. But there is also the fact that I've faced people who are way worse than a puny floor boss," Izuku said, as Koharu thought about her next question. "Are you scared?" she eventually asked. "Every day. I am afraid of losing all of my HP and being incapable of ever returning to my mom. But if there is one thing that I fear above all else, is not being able to save a single person, because I think being a hero is the kindest thing a person can be," Izuku said, as he led the two towards the labyrinth. "Alright everyone. We are going to head into the labyrinth and find the boss room, and whatever you do, do not attack for yourselves," Diavel said, as the entire raid party entered the labyrinth. Rushing through the labyrinth, Izuku and Koharu rushed through multiple hordes of monsters as everyone pulled ahead of them. Killing a wolf in a single hit, Izuku turned to look at Koharu, who had managed to kill another wolf in a single hit as well. She smiled at him determinedly as she took off to take on the next threat, as Izuku kept an eye on her six. Fighting through the small monsters and even the kobold henchmen, they arrived at the kobold lord's room. Diavel opened the door as everyone entered the room to find Ilfong sitting on a throne with a very bored expression. He eventually took notice of them all before he grunted and leaped off his seat and landed in front of everyone. Rearing his head back with his body leaning slightly backwards, he roared out to the heavens as his health bars showed up. Once the health bars showed up, everyone began their attack on the boss with the tanks up front. They rushed in and started to dish out multiple blows to Ilfong from close quarters whilst Izuku pulled out his bow and shot his arrows at the monster. Koharu watched Izuku's back as she took down multiple kobold henchmen on her own whilst keeping an eye on Izuku's back. Kirito and his teammate had teamed up to take on Ilfong as well as they landed decisive blows to the boss. Once Team A backed away, Izuku and Koharu entered the fray as Izuku pulled out his blade and clashed with Ilfang's bone axe. A massive shockwave had blasted out from their clash as both of their faces came close to one another. Izuku gritting his teeth and Ilfong growling at him through his own set of very clearly sharp teeth. Izuku pushed his weapon upright as Ilfong fell backwards, his attack parried as Izuku called out to Koharu. Koharu. SWCH. Izuku called out, as the girl rushed in with a knife skill. K9. Koharu called out, moving her weapon upright. The knife she held moved up through the skin of the boss as he moved backwards as if he was sliced up the body holding onto his wound. Small splashes of white blood hit the ground as Ilfong had growled out even more as Izuku and Koharu pulled back watching the monster. He pulled his axe up over his body as he tossed it back behind him and dropping his shield at the same time. Diavel chose this moment to come in as he charged a sword skill, and that was when both Kirito and Izuku noticed something very off about Ilfong. The weapon he pulled out was not a talwar, it was a nodachi, and they knew how this was going to go down. As Ilfong pulled out his weapon, which was very clearly not a talwar, he jumped around the place landing devastating blows to both the tanks and the other groups. He landed in front of Diavel as he sliced across the young man's chest and through his waist, causing the young man's health to dip into the deep red. Kibeo had also noticed that Diavel was heavily injured from the attack, but there was a paralysis skill evoked on Diavel. He rushed to try and save him but was cut off by a kobold minion as he grunted before looking at Izuku, who looked very shocked. "Hey! Save his butt!" Kibeo screamed, as Izuku shook his head. Ilfong rushed to deal the finishing blow on Diavel as he sat crouched with his shield the only thing holding him upright. Looking up, Diavel saw his life flash through his eyes as Ilfang's weapon was coming towards him. Lowering his head believing that his decision would cause him to die, he and everyone heard a loud clang in the room. Looking over at where Diavel was, they found Izuku standing in front of Diavel with his blade in his hand blocking the nodachi. "Enkidu." Diavel gasped. "Gee, get moving Al already," Izuku said, as Diavel shivered slightly as he crawled away. "Alright big guy, you want to fight someone smaller than you? Then fight me," Izuku called out, as he jumped out of the way of Ilfang's fist. Moving through the field, Izuku showcased his massive speed that was on par with Ilfang's own as they both bounced around the place. Izuku jumped from one pillar to another with Ilfong coming right after him since Izuku was the only other person who was still in the green for health. Landing on the ground, Izuku kept his back to the monster as they jumped from the pillar they were on and went to slam their weapon on his back. Just as everything went in slow motion for Koharu, she was running towards Izuku as she worried about his safety. She then watched as he moved in slow motion around the nodachi that Ilfong had and moved his arm around in a motion she'd seen before. "Detroit Smash!" Izuku called out, activating a martial arts skill. Izuku's hand glowed an ominous yellow color as he slammed his fist into Ilfang's face, causing the monster to fall to the ground instantly. Shaking its head, it turned to look at Izuku as he immediately threw another punch at its gut, sending it flying back into its throne. As soon as Koharu had arrived next to Izuku, she saw that his health was now in the yellow as she gave him a healing item. He nodded at her in thanks as he entered a combat stance next to her as she reciprocated his action. Kirito and his ally had stood next to them as well as they entered a combat stance as well, and as soon as Ilfong roared at them in fury, the squad had rushed at him. Izuku jumped into the air as he pulled his sword behind his back as he simply threw it at Ilfang's eye, causing the creature to hold its eye in pain. Koharu then rushed up and used K9 again, shifting her body to where she could go up Ilfang's body at an angle. Kirito and Asuna then rushed into the fight as they landed multiple blows with their rapier and anneal blade. They consecutively landed attacks on Ilfong as his last HP bar reached into the red color and Ilfong then swung his arm out sending Asuna away. Kirito then attacked Ilfong with a combo attack with his sword skills as he jumped into the air to finally end the attack. Swift sword. Kirito screamed out as he landed the final blow. As soon as this final attack landed on Ilfong, the monster of the first floor screamed out in agony. As he flew into the air, he started to glow ominously before he exploded into white motes of light and pixels as a large congratulations was shown to everyone. Congratulations! You have finished the first floor boss. The second floor has been unlocked for you all to defeat. The game showed to everyone. As everyone was resting after a hard-fought battle, Izuku and Koharu were staring at the stairs leading to the second floor of Aincrad. He smiled at Koharu as she was hugging him close to her as tears fell from her eyes as she trembled in her own hug on him. When I saw you protecting Diavel, I thought that I'd be losing you. I don't want to see you die. Koharu said crying into his chest. Koharu, I won't leave you alone. Izuku said, as the girl looked into his eyes. But what if Koharu asked, as Izuku placed a finger on her lips. Don't worry about the what ifs. Just worry about the now. Izuku said, as Koharu nodded keeping her face in his chest blushing slightly. Izuku looked over at Agile and Kirito as the two smiled at him. They walked over to him as Kirito started to talk to him about what he won through the final attack bonus of the fight. He spoke about how he thought that if Izuku hadn't gotten in the way of Ilfong, that Diavel was going to die. Izuku shook his head as he patted Koharu's head softly causing the girl to tighten her hold on his body. That was some fine swordsmanship. Congratulations. Agile said, as he patted Kirito on the back. Kibeo however lowered his head in anger. Stop cheering. He called out, quieting everyone. Why did you nearly let Diavel die? Kibeo asked, looking at Izuku and Kirito. What are you talking about? Izuku asked, now incredulous. Nearly let him die. Kirito asked. That's what I said. Admit it. You knew the technique the boss is gonna use, you could have told us. Kibeo said, as Izuku looked at Kirito. Then Diavel would have stood a chance. He wouldn't have had to nearly die. Kibeo complained as another player came up. I know why they knew. They called out. They used to be a beta tester. Think about it, he knew the boss's attack patterns. He knew, but he kept it from us. The person called out with a furious expression pointing towards Kirito. And I bet that they're not the only beta testers here. Come on, show yourselves. The random player called out. As the other players of the surviving raid party looked at one another questioning their allies, Kirito stood up and glared at everyone. And before anything else Izuku moved to be in front of Kirito himself and spoke out to everyone present. Are you all seriously going to listen to him? What makes you think that you can call us out and say that we kept that information away? We never saw that move in the beta test when we went against Ilfong in the closed beta. He used a skill that doesn't appear on floor bosses until around floor, Izuku said, as the players shook their head. Then how do you know about that? He called out. Because I've made it to floor 8 in the closed beta. Izuku said, causing everyone to look at him with both crazed and unhappy expressions. Floor. That's got to be a lie, there's no way anyone made it that close to a 10th of Aincrad in the closed beta. The beta testers never made it to floor, the player called out. Just because most beta testers didn't make it to floor 10 like myself, doesn't mean that it's impossible. Izuku called back, as laughing from Kirito was heard. He. Ha 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 ha. So you guys think that I used to be a beta tester? It's not cool to put me in the same class as those noobs. Kirito spoke as Izuku looked at him in shock. What did you say? Kibeo questioned angrily. You heard me. Most of the 1,000 people who scored a slot in SAO's closed beta were rookies. They were so green, they didn't even know how to level up. Me. I'm nothing like those guys, man. During the beta I made it to floors that were higher than any of the other testers, that's a fact. Kirito said, as he walked to have his back to the crowd. I knew about the boss because I fought tons of monsters with way more sword skills on higher floors. I know a bunch of other things too. More than you can ever imagine, more than any info broker. Kirito boasts with a very dark expression. If that's true, then you're worse than a beta tester. You're a goddamn cheater. That's what you are. Kibeo exclaimed. Cheater. He's a beta tester and a cheater. That's a beater. The crowd called out as Kirito opened up his menu and equipped his item drop. A beater. Yeah, that's good. I like it. Kirito said, as everyone gasped except those who were close to him. Okay, you can call me a beater. Just make sure you don't confuse me with those beta testers anymore. Kirito said, as his black garments appeared on his body. Izuku watched as Kirito and Asuna walked away, and Koharu looked up at him as she pouted a little bit. He looked back at her as she was pouting at him as he patted her head again, causing her to blush and look away. You really shouldn't be looking at other girls, you have me right here. Koharu mumbled as Izuku looked at her. What did you say? Izuku asked, as the girl blushed even more. And nothing. Let's just get to the second floor. She said, dragging him away. Hey, we're not done here. Kibeo called out, as Izuku turned his head with Koharu stopping. What do you want, Kibeo? Izuku asked, slightly angered. You're not going to join that filthy beater, are you? He called out. What? Do you think that teaming up with you will be any better? Izuku asked, before turning his back to him. What's he got that is better than us? Kibeo cried out as he glared at Izuku. Well, he's a decent human being for one. And another thing, I was the one who punched you earlier, Kibeo. I'm so glad that I did, because you're even more of an but than I first thought at the meeting. Izuku said, leading Koharu up the stairs to floor. Arriving to the second floor, Izuku and Koharu took a look at the place as they saw the vast plains in all directions. The grass was a wheat yellow color as they saw multiple cow-like monsters grazing on the grass as they moved about the place. There was bee-like monsters around the place as well as they buzzed about the place looking for whatever their code programmed them to search for. Looking at the place with an odd expression, Koharu spoke up to Izuku about to talk about whatever he spoke to Kibeo about. So are we going to talk about how you treated Kibeo earlier? She questioned. No. He reminded me of someone that I don't like anymore. And I will not be talking about it further, I will tell you about my past soon, just I don't feel like exploring it right now. Izuku said, as Koharu nodded. I didn't know it had to do with your past, but if you need someone to talk to, just know that I am here. Koharu said, with a smile. The two took off into the vast plains of floor 2 as they searched for some monsters to kill for item drops. From what Izuku learned in his time just leveling up in the beta, he needed to take down certain beasts from this floor in order to unlock certain gear and weapons. So as he pulled Koharu along, not literally, metaphorically. They found and defeated more than a few onrushing cows grazing nearby and chased them around in order to get some of their hide for armor. They would go after the wind wasp in order to collect some of their stingers to be used as or to create newer and more powerful weapons. Once they had collected their items and gear, they prepared to head out from the first star of the plains when they heard movement from the teleport monument. Turning to glance at whoever was appearing behind them both, they found Kibeo looking worse for wear as he panted. He looked up at the two for a moment before looking away for a moment as he took a deep breath for whatever he was going to ask them. Hey, I know that we don't really like one another Kibeo started as Koharu interjected. One of us has a very bad viewpoint of the other, but what do you need? Koharu asked. See, could you both get me some items so that I could get some equipment for my guild? I just want my people to be prepared for this floor. Kibeo said, as Izuku stared into his eyes. You will find the items you need on these monsters," Izuku said, pulling out a notebook and handing it over to Kayaba. The young man tenderly took the notebook as he checked the contents of the monsters the two had come across during their time there. He brought out a smile as he prepared to thank Izuku for the valuable information about some monsters on this floor when Izuku rose a hand. "If you want to make up for what you said down on the floor 1 boss room, then you better make sure that you don't bring that up again. As much as I would love to smack you around the place, there is a time and place for that. I will have the full notebook about the monsters on this floor within a week, just be sure to hand out the real notebook when I give it to you for everyone," Izuku said, as he pulled Koharu away. "Have a great day, Kayaba," Koharu called out, as the young man nodded. Exploring the area outside of the plains, Izuku and Koharu made it to another area that was a vast wasteland. They found new monsters in this area as they were similar to some of the other monsters from the regular plains. One was similar to the onrushing cow but was a darker color and very much taller and seemingly more powerful than the smaller cow. There were 2 different kinds of this new monster as one was much taller than the other. They were both called the Trembling Ox and the Large Trembling Ox respectively, the only difference was their health points. Another monster was the Glaring Shrew Man, a small mole-like creature that had a hood over their head. And they were very swift monsters that could deal damage very fast, and you could be overwhelmed without backup. They teamed up to take on each new enemy type as they wrote down their attack patterns, both feeling satisfied with the information they went to collect even more info. They came across multiple monsters and wrote down their attack information as well, whilst they walked all around the 2nd floor. The monsters the two came across were called Horror Bats, Keen-Fin Tadpoles, Lesser Taurus Swordsman and the Lesser Taurus Striker. Each of these monsters had very unique attack patterns that if taken lightly could cause massive damage. Moving back towards the middle of floor 2, Izuku and Koharu came across Argo as the young woman info broker was searching for new information. She noticed the two coming towards her as she smiled at them whilst having her whisker tattoos show off how proud she was for the two. Once the two converged on Argo's location, they sat together and told one another about the information they had gotten since being on the 2nd floor. "You got a lot of information about this floor in one day. That's amazing. How can you both move so fast on this floor? It's only been a few hours," Argo exclaimed happily. "Well, we had nothing better to do, so we decided to collect information about the 2nd floor. For those who are still on floor, we gave Kayaba some information about the first zone of floor 2, we were planning on giving him some more information," Izuku said, as Argo nodded. "Want me to be the one to give it to him? I know how much you both hate one another's guts," Argo suggested. "Sure thing, Argo-chan, just let me get some of this information fixed up and you can pass it on to the others," Izuku said, as the girl happily nodded. Whilst Koharu and Argo spoke to one another away from Izuku, the young man focused his time on clearing his mind as well as writing down some adjustments on the information. He wanted Kayaba to not claim that he and Koharu weren't helping him out through information gathering, so he is putting as much information as he could about each monster inside the notebook. If the young man decides to take his anger about the beta testers and Kirito out on him and Koharu, he can easily pull up the notebook and inform him how he is breaking the rule he'd made. Once he finished up with the information gathering and writing, Izuku stood up and walked over to Koharu and Argo. The two were playing patacake. It was adorable for Izuku that he made his menu take a picture of the adorable action between the two girls. After giving Argo the information, she skimmed through it as she laughed a little at some information. "Well, that's all I'm here for. You can find Kirito searching for the 2nd floor boss information around this area. Just make sure that if and when you collect that information, that you tell everyone so we can plan around the boss monster's attacks," Argo said, as she rushed off. The two remaining members of their small coalition just shrugged their shoulders and walked to find Kirito. They would find Kirito as he was killing one of the monsters on the 2nd floor when he sliced through one of the monsters. Izuku placed a palm on the young man's shoulder as he turned around to slice through a new monster before stopping. Koharu just looked fearful that Kirito would just attack Izuku on a whim before he stopped as Kirito just glared at Izuku. "Don't sneak up on people. You don't know whether or not they'll attack you for that. Kirito scolded. Sorry. But we wanted to assist you in finding information on the second floor boss. Izuku said, as Kirito nodded. You can help me find it. I was searching for the nearby dungeon that was close to the labyrinth. If we can find information about the boss monster, it'll be in there. Kirito said, as Izuku and Koharu nodded. Let's begin the adventure to figure out the boss monster's weakness. Izuku and Koharu called out, pointing in the direction Kirito told them the dungeon was. Floor boss info. Trauma. Arriving at the natural cave dungeon guide, the trio enter the cave. The thing they were searching for was information about the floor boss, and they weren't disappointed when they all entered the dungeon. The entirety of the cave systems was covered to the brim with dripping water and crustacean monsters. The trio entered their own combat stances with their weapons of choice, Izuku holding his bow, Kirito holding his anneal blade, and Koharu holding her anneal knife. Rushing into the fray, Kirito and Koharu started harassing the monsters whilst Izuku sniped them from afar. They continued this little plan of theirs until they reached the end of the natural cave, finding a lonely chest in the middle of the room. Koharu was about to enter the room to grab the chest before she was grabbed by Izuku and Kirito, causing her to let out a yelp and yanked back. As the trio entered the room with one another this time, they watched as the room was closed off as a boss monster had appeared from a small part of the floor opening up. Entering a new combat stance, Izuku pulled out his own anneal blade and stood next to both of his party members. This is the boss monster protecting the information about the second floor boss. We need to be highly careful about how we go about this. Izuku said, as Kirito retorted. There's 3 of us, I'm sure that we can defeat him. Kirito retorted. Well, better to be cautious than be arrogant. Koharu yelled as the trio dodged the first strike of the boss monster. Izuku leaped backwards as he bounced off the wall and landed a glancing blow against the boss monster's right arm. Kirito retaliated from the first attack with a slice across the monster's legs, causing it to fall to a knee. Koharu came in from above as she landed a powerful strike into the monster's eye, causing its health to dip into the yellow from their combination. She jumped back, landing in Izuku's arms as he put her down next to him as the trio glared at their opponent. The giant of a Taurus creature from outside the cave, but this one had a name above its head. It stated that its name was Caleb. The trio glared at the giant Taurus monster as he glared down at them, and unknown to the trio he opened his mouth. They assumed to roar at them. But he then spoke some words that caused them all to pause slightly at how warbled they appeared to be. I will not allow you to kill as Tarios. The Taurus called out. What the foo dash? Kirito was about to speak before the Taurus attacked. A few hours had passed as the trio stood outside of the dungeon. As they liked their wounds, they had managed to defeat the mini-boss monster. But it came at the cost of being nearly killed for that information, as they trembled from its final words to the trio. Mstr Astrios will Aavengumi. The creature warbled out. So is anyone going to talk about how the monster was talking to us? Koharu asked, as she stared at Izuku and Kirito. Nope. The 2 boys shook their heads with a quick reply. What? Why? This is groundbreaking information. Koharu called out. Koharu, this is a game. The simple fact that enemies can speak to the player was not something that was groundbreaking news. Izuku said, as Koharu pouted at him. Don't treat me as a little kid. I've played games as a kid growing up. I just thought that monsters talking in this game would be groundbreaking as a whole. Koharu tried to reason. Koharu, if anyone were to know that the monsters we fight and kill on a regular basis could talk, they wouldn't try to kill them. Just converse with them and try and find a way to move about it. They might just create a religion speaking about keeping them alive. All when they are just a bunch of ones and zeros. Kirito said, as he looked at her in a deadpan expression. There's no way people would do that, right? Izuku. Koharu asked as Izuku shook his head. Kirito is talking about the extremes people as a whole could do. Do you remember what the news talked about 3 years ago about the animals with quirks that started a fire in a home? Izuku asked, as the girl nodded. Well, the people defended the dogs, and guess what happened? Izuku said, as the girl thought about it. I don't remember any more news talking about them anymore since the first incident. Koharu said, as Izuku nodded. That's because a hero put them in prison. As it turned out, the people who were the quirk dogs were actually villains who disguised themselves as dogs with quirks. Izuku said, as the girl looked very pale. The people who were defending the dogs were then arrested for aiding the villains on multiple counts of murder. And they were subsequently placed in prison for defending them. Izuku stated as the girl looked saddened by the information. As the three just stayed quiet from that moment on, Kirito eventually broke off from the two as he stated he needed to talk to Argo about some information he'd found earlier before meeting them. As the two sat outside of the natural cave's entry place, Koharu then remembered something that Izuku informed her about from the start of the game 2 months prior. She had been thinking about it ever since she had seen what he really looked like underneath the mask he'd created. But now that she looked closer at him, she noticed how the scarring on his face was more burn-based than anything. Well, minus the cut scar on his left cheek. Thinking that this was the perfect moment to ask about that, she opened her mouth to speak when they heard the sound of fighting in the distance. Getting up from their spot on the ground, they both rushed towards the sound of fighting going as fast as they could. If they could stop whatever this fight was brought up by, then this means that they could prevent it from happening again later on. They turned around the corner of a tree and found multiple people from Kabeo's guild fighting with a group of people. For the last time, the Aincrad Liberation Army has called dibs on these hunting grounds. Leave this area so we can continue hunting. One of the leading members of the force called out. We have been here longer than your guild. We have hunting rights by being here first. The small party of players called back. This now belongs to the Aincrad Liberation Army, so get your own hunting grounds away from this spot. The guard said, angrily waving their weapon around. Hey! Watch where you're throwing your weapon. You might hurt someone. The party members called at them. I don't care whoever gets hurt, this hunting zone is in the hands of Kabeo. If you have a problem with it, then you take your problems up with him. The person said, as they shoved the party members down to the ground. Izuku and Koharu watched the exchange for a bit before jumping into the fray as they glared at the group. The guild members then looked at the two with a harsh glare before realizing that they were Koharu and Izuku. They walked over to them as they tried to hide the fact that they were stealing a hunting ground from another player. Hey! Kabeo wanted to let you know thanks for giving us the information about the monsters of this floor. We were able to be fully prepared for the monsters. All that's left for us is to search for the floor boss. The leader of the small group said. So, you weren't trying to steal a hunting ground from this group over here, who clearly stated that they were here before you? Izuku asked, as the leader just scowled. I know that they're lying, we found this area completely empty of their party. They came out of the woodworks claiming that they were the ones using this field. The guy said, as Izuku just gave him a deadpanned expression. What is really going on here? Izuku asked, with very narrowed eyes. As Izuku was interrogating the Guild of Aincrad Liberation Army, Koharu was over with the victims of the attack. She had been questioning them whilst Izuku interrogated the ALA Guild, and the information she'd heard from them was harrowing. The ALA had come out of nowhere claiming that their hunting ground was theirs and they had just returned to start a quest to get the supplies that are required from this spot. Koharu was about to look behind her to tell Izuku about the information she'd found but was surprised to see Izuku punching the leader of the small group from the ALA in the face. Knocking the young man down to his butt as Izuku glared down at him as well as the others who'd placed spears up to his neck. You cannot attack one of our own without provocation. The three members growled. Oh, I cannot attack your party leader because of no provocation. Well, I was provoked the moment he shoved someone else's party member without being provoked in the slightest. Izuku said, angrily grabbing the spear by the blade. He pulled it away from his face as he glared into the trio's eyes as they became suddenly very fearful of him. The aura he was exuding was one of both power as well as fury, murderous intent, her mind supplied as she was rooted to her spot. The others from the party she had talked to were rooted in their spot in fear as well, not sure if they should be moving from their spot. If I find that you guys are stealing spots from other players that need to do their quests in these kinds of areas again, do not PSS me off. Because I will fight you all on my own. Izuku growled as he broke their weapons, turning them into pixels of white energy. Walking away, Izuku gave the group some items that he'd gotten from that quest earlier the other day and let them go on their way. He helped Koharu up from the ground as she just walked behind him, her thoughts about the scars on his face forgotten once again. They continued down their path until they came across Kirito and Argo talking with Asuna, and Koharu looked at Izuku. Her face became pale slightly before she shook her head. She knew that thinking of Izuku like he was a murderer was not a good thing to say, so she decided to say something else that was on her mind. Do you think Kirito-kun will get together with Asuna-san? She asked, as Izuku choked on air. Sword Art Online, Isolation AN. Hello everyone and welcome back to another chapter of Sword Art Online, Integral Factor. I am so happy with how you all are loving this story thus far. I will try and keep the updates on this story to being strictly daily for the time being until I reach around 20 chapters, which I will then turn it from daily to every other day. See you all at the end of the chapter. Let's begin. Walking up to the trio, Izuku and Koharu made their presence known as they arrived, placing their weapons in the ground. Looking over at the two, Kirito smiled as he went back into a conversation with Asuna, the girl who was Kirito's party member on the previous floor boss battle. Argo, however, was looking kind of squeamish as she was looking at every single possible area that was not Izuku, Koharu, Kirito, and Asuna's faces. Izuku gained a concerned expression as he placed a hand on her shoulder, forcing her to look at him with her brown eyes. Izuku held her still in his grip as she slowly stopped panicking before she gulped down her fear before determinedly looking at him. What's wrong, Argo-san? Izuku asked, as the girl looked away. Kibayo and most of the raiding party had entered the boss labyrinth without the information that we were supposed to deliver to them. They don't know about the 3 bosses that we'd have to fight before anything else. Argo said, as Izuku gained a serious expression. Are they crazy? Asuna called out, bewildered. They'll do anything to get the boss item drop, we need to inform them quickly. Kirito called back. With that said and done, everyone took off towards the boss battle arena. Izuku leading the charge with his sword as he sliced through many of the opposing enemies that they'd come across. Kirito kept pace with him as the two took on the main offensive attacks as they pushed through the forces of monsters. Eventually though, the group arrive at the boss room and push through the doors to find the entirety of the raiding party being tossed around like ragdolls. Rushing in, Izuku sent a powerful kick at the Taurus boss monster, saving a small group from being killed. Get back. I'll handle it from here. Izuku called to the small group. Hey. That was our kill. They retorted. You were about to die, now is not the time to be calling dibs on kills. Izuku responded as he dodged a swiping attack from the monster's weapon. What's wrong? We were strong enough to fight it on our own. The group called out to him. This boss fight isn't even a one on the raid. It's a multiple boss battle. Izuku said, as he jumped down from the boss. Returning back to the small group, he yanked them to their feet and tossed them aside from another attack that Nato the Colonel Taurus threw at them. Izuku threw out his sword as he parried the attack as fast as he could. There was no way he was going to be losing to this kind of boss monster. Jumping around the giant monster, he landed glancing blows at best since his element of slashing attacks wasn't something that held an advantage. Switching to his bow, he began firing multiple sword skill arrows at the beast as it was pushed back from his assault. He chanced to glance back at the group as they had returned back to their allies to heal up. Letting his shoulders relax for a moment, he turned to meet up with the rest of them. But apparently that was a plan by the group, as Izuku noticed something familiar about them all. They were wearing the same gear that those people monopolizing the hunting fields were. Izuku then realized the mistake of coming here. Kibayo wasn't just attacking the boss monster early, no, he was preparing their tomb. Before Kirito, Asuna and Koharu could react, the door to the boss monster had closed behind them all. Izuku, Koharu and Asuna moved about the field as Kirito searched for a way to get out of the boss monster's room. But it appeared to be no luck for them as they tried to move throughout the room, and as they fought the boss monster, Nato, had been defeated. Izuku took a deep breath as he felt his left leg suddenly feel like it was incapable of being used at the moment. Koharu noticing this rushed to him and asked if he was alright before she noticed him cringing as if he was in pain. Looking at his health points, she saw they were in the green so there couldn't be anything causing the pain on his face. "What's wrong, Izuku?" Koharu asked, worriedly. "And my leg. It feels as though I've put it through a meat grinder," Izuku said, as he was lifted from the ground. "Well, I found the way out of here. Let's go," Kirito said, pulling his arm over Izuku's neck and hauling him out. "We need to figure out what happened to him. There's something wrong with his leg," Koharu said, concerned. Leaving the boss room, they moved through the labyrinth as they finally reached the outer layer of the labyrinth. Moving Izuku over to a small rock nearby, he was seated on it as he moved his hand over it in order to see what was wrong. That was when he remembered something that happened in his past between him and Katsuki and how it turned out. He cursed to himself internally as he self-loathingly talked horribly about how he could have forgotten about such an injury. Looking up at Kirito, Asuna and Koharu, he knew that his time of keeping his past life secret was coming to a close. He took a deep breath before calling the trio over to him as they moved in to sit next to him to think about a battle strategy. "What's wrong?" Koharu asked, as Izuku looked into her green eyes. "I need to inform you three about my life before Sao," Izuku said, as everyone gained serious expressions. "Why, you don't have to tell us. We really need to focus on the game right now," Koharu said, as Izuku shook his head. "Why, you won't know how to deal with my leg if I don't tell you why it hurts so much," Izuku retorted as the girl just sat down and looked into his emerald eyes. "You all might already figure it out, but I was born quirkless," Izuku started, as the group minus Kirito just looked at him in confusion. "You're quirkless?" Kirito asked, confused. "Yeah, I was announced quirkless by my elementary school when I was just 4 years old," Izuku stated, venom leaving his lips as he said it. "We're not going to like this story, are we?" Asuna asked. "No, you're not," Izuku said, as his vision faded to long-distant memories he'd wish he'd forgotten. Izuku was running through the school grounds as he tried to find a way to escape his old friend. The young boy, Bakugo Katsuki, had taken a liking to beating him up all under the pretenses of making sure he knew his place. Izuku spent most of his time in elementary school essentially playing keep away with Katsuki as the boy had really wanted to hammer it into his head about his dreams. Izuku had just announced to the class that he was quirkless, and that he still dreams of becoming a hero without a quirk. And that was something that his old friend just couldn't take. Everyone in their class was raised into thinking that someone quirkless couldn't become a hero, much less hold a long-standing job to pay for most of the bills in this day and age. Izuku, however, thought otherwise and kept his training up through running away from Katsuki and his goons whenever they felt particularly trigger-happy on beating him up. The boy had met his match, however, when the explosive quirked boy used his own quirk to fly around the place. And as Izuku rushed down the small alley, as fast as his little legs could take him, he was pushed into the ground by a small explosive shockwave. His eyesight had been terribly damaged that day as he left the alley with so many cuts and bruises on his body his mother thought he'd been beaten by a villain. Over the next few weeks, Izuku would come into the home with multiple injuries, and it got to the point that his mother was very fearful for his life. So much so that she tried to change his school life many times, but the pay for it was too much for her to handle. With her being a single mother and not being there for her son all the time, money was becoming more and more of a problem in her life. So she just decided to say F it and let him stay in his school. There was no other place that would accept quirkless students anyway. Izuku, however, stayed away from her most of the time to the point that she thought he'd lost his love for her. But Izuku would come home every day and tell her he loved her every time he came home from school. Izuku however did this to hide the amount of pain behind his smile. The pain of losing his best friend, all because he thought quirkless meant worthless. Izuku knew that quirkless was just a title, and that he could become a hero without one. There were many heroes out there who didn't rely on their own quirk after all. Pushing through the pain every day was becoming so tiring that Izuku forgot to cover his wounds one day. It was 10 years since Izuku had drifted from the Bakugo household and staying as far away from Katsuki as possible. And it was a certain birthday for the boy, as he had actually managed to enter his class without being beaten down on. But he knew that it would be coming. The beatdown this time would be one that he'd remember for sure, as he had noticed Kaken training himself up even more lately. That mean he was preparing for something truly devastating to Izuku, and he can only hope and pray that Kaken doesn't do anything too horrifying. The day was mostly pretty good, all things considered. Nobody talked to him. But that was mainly because of the fact they didn't want to be seen conversing with a quirkless individual. Izuku however knew that something was off today, since Katsuki had been getting closer to his seat than usual. And by the end of the day, the boy had immediately taken his chance to escape as fast as possible. But it was all for naught, as the explosive quirked boy had jumped from the second story of the school, out of the classroom window, and kept himself hidden until the right moment. When Izuku was seen rushing outside looking everywhere but up, he struck. Izuku was about to look up when the sound of explosions as well as burnt caramel smells entering his nose and ears. Before he could even react, he was slammed into the ground as he let out a yelp of pain before looking behind his head at Bakugo. The boy had held his hand tantalizingly close to his left thigh, and the boy growled angrily at Izuku as he spoke to him in a very malicious tone. "Happy birthday, Izu-chan," he said, before a very loud explosion went off. "Aaaawa!" Izuku screamed in agony. Screaming in utter agony, Izuku flipped Bakugo off his back as he scurried over to a wall. He had adrenaline pumping through his veins as he breathed heavily and grunted in more and more pain as the adrenaline ran its course. Looking down at the BLD trail that had been given to him by Bakugo, Izuku looked closer at his leg only to find something utterly horrifying. His left leg was nearly seared clean off his hips as he looked up at Kaken, the boy glaring and smirking maliciously. "Hey, your birthday beating isn't over, Izu-chan. Come back over and take it like a man," he said, using his explosions to get closer to Izuku faster than he could react. Waking up in the hospital, Izuku looked over at his leg in order to hope that he didn't have it amputated. Upon closer inspection, his leg was still there, but it was more mangled than he'd wished it wouldn't be. Letting out a very weary sigh of exasperation, he looked over to his right to find his mother angrily yelling on the phone before realizing something else. His mother was very blurry to him, and he couldn't really see her all that well considering she was right next to him. Rubbing his eyes to make sure that everything was just being blocked by his overabundance of tears, he noticed there weren't any tears falling from his face. Kaken had made him partially blind. And from the sound of things, the hearing on his left side of his body was very wrong as well. In fact, when he turned his head to the left, he could only hear his mother's muffled words on the phone because of his right ear. But covering that one up, all he was greeted to was complete and utter silence. He felt his heart begin to race as he thought of what happened earlier that day at school and how he knew he shouldn't have gone to school. "Izuku can hear me?" Inko asked, as Izuku could only hear garbled words from her. What? What are you asking?" Izuku questioned back as Inko looked even more sad. Izuku partially on one side," Inko said, as Izuku connected the dots. I can barely see anything, but at the same time I can't hear anything from my left ear. And most of what I can hear is from the right side, but that's all muffled mutter, mutter, mutter," Izuku said, eventually falling into a mutter storm. "Izuku, I need you to listen. Your left leg has been irreparably damaged. It's already been amputated," Inko said, as Izuku just stared at her. What are you talking about? I can still feel it," Izuku said, as Inko shook her head. "Izuku, your leg was nearly hanging by a singular strand of skin. The paramedics had been forced to cut the last strand to prevent you from dying. Why, your left arm was seriously mangled as well. Inko said, pointing at his left arm. Looking down to his left arm, Izuku was now worried since he couldn't see his left hand anymore. Lifting the blanket, he felt around with his right hand before noticing how there wasn't a hand but a mere stump of his left arm hanging on the bed. Looking into his mother's eyes, he never heard the heart monitor rushing harshly to the point that he was having a panic attack. Before he knew it, he was sedated for the evening, his mother being forced to leave the hospital until they could further treat him. The reason I had pain in my left leg was because it was amputated before I even was stuck in this game. My leg is just a prosthetic. Izuku said, pulling the breathe leg, revealing his prosthetic leg. Why, you lost your leg? And half your arm? Koharu asked, completely shocked. But you used your left arm and legs multiple times in the past. Asuna said, as Izuku showed the prosthetic on his arm as well. I've had parts of my body replaced with prosthetics, and it's very terrible, by the way. My mom doesn't get much pay from her job because of my quirkless status, and with her being discriminated for caring about me, she doesn't get enough money to pay for better prosthetics for me. Izuku said, as he let out a sad sigh. That's so horrible. Why would your friend D do that to you? Koharu asked, hands covering her mouth, tears falling from her eyes. Because he was never my friend to begin with. Izuku said, venom coming out again. Kirito took this moment as the time to chime in as he looked into Izuku's eyes. You are clearly able to see properly right now. What gives on that department, not to mention your hearing? Kirito questioned. I've been so cautious about everything in the past 10 years of my life that I've gained a sixth sense of sorts. It allows me to feel when someone is watching me from afar or whether someone wants to do bad things to me. Izuku said, as Kirito nodded. Well, we should probably go see what the Kabeo was trying to do, locking us inside the boss room. Kirito said, helping Izuku up. Yeah, I have a few words to speak to him about as well. Izuku said, as the group angrily walked towards the teleport monument nearby. Kabeo, floor boss battle prelude. The group of 4 had made their way over to where the raid squad were located. Koharu had taken it upon herself to assist Izuku whilst walking towards the building on the second floor main town. He was still feeling the phantom pains within his leg that he could barely walk on his own without nearly falling over multiple times over. But eventually they arrived at the building where they heard the sounds of people talking over one another. Entering the building, they all made their way towards the front of the raiding party as the people all took notice of the 4. Kabeo suddenly took notice of the group as well as he stood up and rushed over to them with worry written on his features. Are you all okay? What happened to Enkidu? He called out, worried. Your people just left us inside the boss room all on our own. They tried to get us all killed. Izuku spat, as Kabeo looked at him weirdly. I know we have our differences, but that is a very huge accusation. Kabeo said, glaring at Izuku. I have every reason to accuse you, Kabeo. I've never really liked you ever since the first floor boss meeting. People from your guild are trying to take control of the hunting fields that lower-level players were already at. And now they tried to kill me, Koharu, Kirito and Asuna. Izuku said, as Kabeo stared at the 4. Are the rest of you going to say the same thing? Because I will need proof about this. Kabeo said, as Koharu glared at him. What kind of evidence do you need? Enkidu had experienced phantom pains during the fight against Nato, the first of 3 floor bosses for this floor. Koharu said, as Kabeo looked in her direction. There's 3 bosses that we need to face for this floor. He asked, looking over at someone who looked very scared. That's right, Kabeo, and the guy who informed you about the floor boss probably didn't warn you about that, right? Kirito questioned. He didn't tell me that there were at least 3 bosses that we'd need to fight, he only told me that Nato was the only boss monster in the labyrinth. Kabeo said, as he looked over his shoulder. whilst everyone talked to one another after clearing up the misunderstanding between Kibeo and his forces. Izuku moved to sit down in a corner as he felt his left thigh as he let out a small groan of pain as Koharu sat next to him. He looked into her worried eyes as she glanced at him every now and again in order to make sure that he was fine. He shook his head at her as if he knew she was going to ask if he wanted to stay behind on this boss monster raid. "Don't even ask me to stay back here, Koharu. I will be assisting in the defeat of Nato the Colonel Taurus, Baron the General Taurus and Asterios the Taurus King," Izuku said, as Koharu nodded. "Just wanted to be sure how you wanted to react to that," she said, as Izuku shook his head. It was about a few hours later after the whole meeting had finished that Izuku and Koharu had left the building. They were moving towards the inn nearby so they could get something to eat and some medicine in order to help Izuku with his pain problems. They couldn't even get a few feet away from the building before someone appeared behind them and approached with malicious intent. Turning to greet them all, Izuku looked at the newcomer with a glare as they looked back at him with a glare of their own. "What the F was that? You just got me kicked out of the ALA." He called out. "It's not my fault you didn't inform Kibeo of the floor boss monsters. That is all you. Let's not forget about the fact that me, Koharu, Kirito and Asuna just saved your buttes," Izuku said, as the guy growled even more. "You cannot tell me what to do," he said, as he pulled a blade on Izuku. "We're in a safe zone, we can't fight," Izuku said, plainly. "I don't care. You are ruining my chances of getting close to Kibeo," the guy screamed angrily. "That's not my problem, isn't it?" Izuku said, as the guy growled. As Izuku watched the young man attack him, Izuku noticed something very familiar about the guy's preparational attack. He was coming in with a very clear right-handed punch, and as he compared the newcomer with someone he knew in the past, specifically, Bakugo Katsuki, he realized that Bakugo didn't know that he was Izuku, and he used this to his advantage. Dodging the first attack at him, the guy looked at him weirdly as he glared again, going to attack again. Using the same arm to attack again, Izuku dodged to the left, grabbing the young man's arm and tossed him over his shoulder onto the ground. "Gagh." The young man called out. "I hope that we're done here," Izuku said, walking over to Koharu. "We're not done here, Enkidu. What kind of name is that anyway? I think that your name should be Deku instead," he called out, as Izuku looked over his shoulder at the boy with a very harsh glare. "If you call me that name, I will make sure that you don't see the outside world ever again," Izuku said, as the boy's glare became something of mirth. "You don't like the nickname, Deku? Do people outside this worthless game call you that?" he questioned as Izuku continued to walk away. "I don't have time for this kind of conversation," Izuku said, Koharu looking at him worriedly. The young man continued to follow the two of them as Izuku's patience with him was starting to wear thin. His hand was lowered to be placed where his sword was, and Koharu was now noticing how close Izuku was to retaliating against someone this annoying. From what she'd known, he was very patient, and if he was already this close to using his weapon on them, that was bad news. But before the guy could come up to them both, Izuku turned around and sliced his sword in between them and Koharu. Koharu noticed how Izuku's emerald eyes suddenly changed to a very dark red color as he glared down at the other boy. "You have been trying my patience. Do you really want me to fight you right now? Because I can and will kill you if you want," Izuku yelled angrily. "I don't care about your worthless patience, I just want to know how you managed to dodge my attacks. Nobody's ever done that before," he called back. "It's because I know someone who always leads with a right punch. If you really want others to not know how you fight, don't telegraph your attacks, you dipshit idiot," Izuku screamed as he punched the boy in the face, knocking them to the ground. Entering the inn with a quiet fury, Izuku left Koharu to deal with the person outside. He wasn't hungry anymore as he went to go lay down and try and calm himself down from the outburst of anger. He'd never really let his anger go, at least until earlier on the day everything happened he'd gotten told to kill himself by his old friend turned bully and he was downright furious. But because he couldn't do anything to his bully, he was culled into silence. Now he had to deal with another person who was as hot-headed as his old friend and probably not as nice as him as well. Taking in a deep breath, Izuku sat down on the inn's bed frame as he thought about what he should prepare for in the upcoming boss room raid. Koharu entered the room not too much later than he had as she sat next to him giving him a side hug. While Izuku was still mad at the guy for being such a douchebag, he was still trying to bottle up all his anger and fury. Something that Koharu had very clearly noticed from his outburst outside of the inn, now that she was shown rubbing his back. As soon as he stopped planning, tears fell from his eyes as he slammed his fist onto the desk, causing an immortal object icon to appear on it. I am sorry for that. Ivy never had an outburst like that. Izuku said, tears still falling. Don't worry, I was just surprised from that. You don't get the chance to let your anger and hatred out all that much, do you? She asked. No, I don't have anyone to confide in at home. My mom and I have been growing distant with one another over the last 10 years. Izuku said, as he sniffled. When we get out of here, how about you regain your relationship with her? Then you can introduce me to her. Koharu asked, rubbing her shoulder on his. I think I'd like that. Izuku said, as he gave Koharu a hug. Hey, what are friends supposed to be for? She asked, as Izuku chuckled. I don't even know the meaning of friends, I've never even had a true friend since I turned 4. Izuku said, as Koharu hugged him tighter. Well, I guess this means I should make up for the 10 long years without a very good friend. She said, as Izuku chuckled. A few days had now passed since everyone had the boss meeting. Kibeo was leading the charge for the ALA Guild with another leader of the ALA Lind. The man was blue-haired, but he was the more logical of the two leaders within the Aincrad Liberation Army. He had made the groups for this kind of attack on the boss monsters as Izuku and Koharu were on a team with Kirito. The trio looked at the boss monster of Nato the Coronal Taurus as Kirito and Koharu turned their heads to look at Izuku. The young man had pulled out his bow as the two smiled at him, expressions determined to win. We'll defeat this boss and move on to the next floor. Koharu said, as Kirito piped up. The next floor is my favorite of all the floors Aincrad has to offer anyway. He said, as Izuku nodded. Why is that? Koharu asked, confused. Elves. Izuku and Kirito said, stars in their eyes.